Hi folks, Michael, investing professor here. I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. I'm not feeling that great. Got a bit of eye cold, so I better wear the sunglasses just for the lights. But I'm gonna pull through it and hopefully you guys can help me. Ever been asked the question, what time is it? Now, maybe today you'd check your phone, but back in my day, I can't believe I'm saying that, I'd glance at my wrist to check the time on my watch. Now, 100 years ago, most people would pull watches out of their pockets. I used to have a pocket watch, don't know where it's gone. Watches were so valuable, they'd hand them down as family heirlooms. So what makes a timepiece an investment? What even is an investment? Well, in this video, I'm going to share 3 nuggets of value with you, explaining alternative investments and different types of watches, where and how you may be able to buy and maybe even sell a watch with less risk of losing money, and some extra tips from the perspective of someone who has been collecting a few luxury timepieces over the years. Perhaps you already own a timepiece, or might want to consider at some point the goal of one day owning one and how it could benefit you. In some of my other videos on luxury assets such as exotic cars, we talk about how affordable they can actually be and how they can benefit you no matter whether you are just starting out as a teenager, maybe not gone to college, maybe in college, or someone with a regular, average, middle income job looking for more out of life. Or maybe you're an entrepreneur. Look, there are a lot of benefits to curating a luxury lifestyle that you may have overlooked. Now, please don't make investment decisions based solely on this video. Who am I to know? After all, I'm just a guy sharing his mind. But I will inform you that no antique watch was damaged in the production of this video. And it's important that none of your computers get damaged too. So please be gentle when remembering to click that like button. It really does help encourage me to make more of these free content videos and helps with the algorithm. So thank you so much, you guys. Let's get right to it. What are investments? Well, as a finance guy, I might think about investments as opposed to consumption items where you're just maybe drinking coffee, and sure, you could call that as an investment, but it's going to go to zero most likely. As soon as you drank the coffee, that's it, it's all used up. Whereas you think about investment, you think, well, what can I get out of it afterwards? Like, what can I liquidate it if I wanted to get the money back from the coffee? Sorry, you can't get the money back from your coffee. Whereas an investment, maybe you can get the money back. Maybe you can make a profit. Sometimes you make a loss. An investment also can be thought about as maybe you're holding it for at least 1 year. That's another way of looking about it, right? Because after 1 year, you're no longer subject typically to short-term capital gains, otherwise known as our regular income tax. After a year, you're usually subject in the US at least to long-term capital gains tax, which is typically lower. So what are alternative investments? Well, we could think of these historically anyway. You know, we thought about things like even commodities such as precious metals. I mean, one of the most ancient would be gold, going way back thousands of years, but it's not great for lower denomination stuff. Like silver is better for lower denomination because it's easier to make day-to-day purchases with, say, silver than it is with gold. Namely, there's more supply of silver than there is with gold. Still, gold is rare, but silver is still rare, but not quite as rare. There's more supply of it, and so its value per ounce is lower. Then we can look at things like platinum, palladium, other precious metals with modern industrial uses, for instance in railroads, but there's also oil, of course, in our modern energy economy. And if we go further than oil, we think about things like beans, etc., just other general commodities. These are sometimes considered as alternatives to your standard run-of-the-mill stocks and bonds. Now, other alternatives could include art. We can think about millionaires, billionaires trying to build up their art collections. And this could be from historical Renaissance art like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo Buonarroti. I'm starting to think of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles here, like Donatello, Raphael. But there's also things like more modern, like Impressionist even, like 19th century, 1800s Impressionist art like Van Gogh, Renoir, Monet, etc. And even modern art like Andy Warhol when he looked at the pop art, which is very much based on advertising. And in his case, at least 2 of his art pieces went for the 9 figures. We're talking $100, $200 million. Just Marilyn Monroe in blue starts to come to mind. Another alternative investment are hypercars. There we're thinking of the Bugatti, the LaFerraris, your Pagani, your Koenigsegg, etc. But also we have luxury timepieces. So what are luxury timepieces and what makes them so special? Well, typically these are watches that are made or handmade in Switzerland. Now, my father was a film professor. I'm not going to start playing a movie called The Third Man, but in that movie, the character that was played by Orson Welles, Harry Limes, says, "In Switzerland, they had brotherly love. They had 500 years of democracy and peace. And what did that produce? The cuckoo clock. But it really goes to show Switzerland is famous for handmade clocks. Now, we're not thinking about the cuckoo clock here, your grandfather clock or regular clocks. We're thinking about wristwatches because these are more modern inventions. The handmade wristwatch, Swiss make, is an art form. When you are collecting these timepieces, you are enjoying and getting to partake in that passion. All those hours, those hundreds of thousands of hours over years and years and years going into creating, crafting these watches. You're part of history. And today there certainly is a following. You just go online, go to any of the watch forums. The jewelers, they create margins, typically speaking quite high. It tends to be an appreciating asset class overall. Depends on what you're investing in, of course, but overall. So what are our types of watches? Well, there's a big spectrum, right? So on the one side of the spectrum, we have your basic introductory retail watches, your Casios, maybe even your Swatch watches. Now, I was a big fan of Casio back in the day, the digital watches where you could control TVs. Not saying that I ever changed TVs when I was in school, but these were great. But for those of you that are more tech savvy today, you can think of your Apple watches. Still, these don't hold much value secondhand. Going further into more designer watches, we can think about brands like Hugo Boss. However, Hugo Boss, typically speaking, and other brands that are similar, tend to just take cheap watches and put a stamp on them, almost like Fruit of the Loom for clothing. So they're not really handmade quality watches where they're made out of gold or silver or they're made with diamonds. That's typically not the case with these designer watches. So they're not really worth that much secondhand. They don't retain their value because you're really thinking about what's the bottom value when you could actually just liquidate it, when you have to liquidate it. So moving up then beyond these kind of retail or designer watches, the next we're thinking about is commercial watches. So these are brands like this Tissot I've had now for almost 2 decades. So I bought this timepiece as a gift to myself while I was graduating from my first master's in economics in Cambridge. A few hundred British pounds sterling, a different level of prices back then, but it was very much a commercial watch. So then after we go past commercial, we're getting into the kind of entry luxury watches, such as your Bell & Ross, some of your Tag Heuers, even your Cartiers, your Omega from James Bond, and then possibly into your Breitling, something like this Breitling here, which is a Navitimer that I purchased a few years ago. As we're getting into the Breitling watches and such, we're almost at then your boutique or your higher end luxury, because at that point you're getting into your household name brands like Rolex, Patek Philippe, Audemars Piguet, and of course things like Richard Mille, which is almost analogous to your hypercars. So you really are going up. The watch battery is another thing that's quite different. So something like this commercial Tissot, which would be kind of similar to Casio in a certain extent, using a quartz battery, as opposed to this Breitling here, which is using an automatic, so there's no battery. You just have to wind the watch every 2 days or so. Now, of course, I've always had an interest in watches, but when I bought this Tissot almost 2 decades ago, I thought to myself at the time, a few £100 sterling, especially for a student, seemed significant. How could I ever justify a few thousand dollars here, or even a few tens of thousands now at this point? And so this is when I had my resurgence of interest in the last few years in watches, knowing that I wasn't just throwing money quite literally down the toilet. You could actually potentially throw your money into this asset, enjoy it, and then if you want to get rid of it in the future, you can more or less get most of your money back, or maybe even make a profit on it. Now, I'm not making any judgments between collectors or traders, right? The difference being the collecting you're thinking of buying and holding, much like what I've done with this Tissot watch, although it wasn't exactly a collector's watch in the same regard. Trading, you could think about people who want to buy and sell. Maybe they're trying to make a profit. They might be going in, again, not quite like day trading necessarily, although they do make quite high percentages in the short term, though that market is getting more and more liquid over time. There's a lot more people involved in it, but there's still definitely arbitrage opportunities do exist for profit. It's up to you guys to decide, I'm not here to be the moral arbiter of what's good or what's wrong in terms of collection versus trading. I enjoy to collect watches, but that said, sometimes I just want to have a watch for a short period of time, see if I like it, and then after a year, 2 years, etc., I might move on and out of that watch. But where would you buy these watches? Well, you could go to the dealers, you could go to the jeweler, for instance, and there's plenty of jewelers, whether they're Rolex or whether they're IWC, Breitling, Patek Philippe stores, Omega stores, etc., or you can go to the more general watch stores, high-end watch stores. But the thing with the jewelers, and it's great if you create a connection with them because then they might be able to get you really coveted brand new watches. However, you most likely are going to be getting ripped off by the jewelers because the actual MSRP, etc., and the margins they put in are quite high a lot of the time. So often it's the case that they could have an 80% margin. So they're selling you a watch that's $10,000 worth for $18,000. So when you turn around a few months or a year later and you want to sell it back, all of a sudden you got a $10,000 watch. You're saying, well, I just paid $18,000 for it. So it's the margin, the difference there. If you don't want to go to a jeweler, where do you go? Well, there's the big watch trading sites such as Chrono24, which is very famous. Also got a plethora of forums, your Rolex forums, your Omega forums, Watch You Seek. There's a bunch of forums there. There's, of course, eBay is a very popular site. I don't necessarily recommend Craigslist for the more expensive watches. There's also a site called Grailsy. When you're buying on these websites, just know you're buying secondhand watches. But the good thing with these secondhand watches is that rather than pay the new price, they come down in value quite a lot sometimes, not always, but sometimes. And then they kind of stay at that same level. They might actually come down at the first year and then just plateau, maybe even increase over time, depending on the timepiece. You want to feel comfortable, you want to feel confident in making your purchase. Well, that's where you're going to be buying the seller. As much as you're buying the watch, focus on who's selling you the watch. Is their lifestyle consistent or congruent with this? Is this person you think that could afford this kind of a watch? Have they sold multiple watches in the past? Have they a good reputation online? Are there reviews? Can you contact people who they've sold watches to in the past? But if you're still uncertain, you can engage in certain services online that have the equivalent of escrow services. So the buyer and the protector are protected. PayPal GNS has one, Chrono24 has one, Grailsy is excellent. So what they do is the seller sends the watch to a place where they can vet the quality of the watch. That gives a bit more confidence to the buyer. When the buyer is buying the watch, they know that the watch has been vetted and has got an authentication guarantee. On the other side of the coin, seller also wants to make sure that they're going to get paid. So the money is usually kept in escrow while the watch is being also sent there in escrow, so that, it's a little bit like buying a house in that regard. That's, again, you pay a little more of a fee for that particular thing if you want to do that. So how do you take care of these watches? Well, one thing to do is making a contact with a local watch repair person, and that will save you in the long term. When you need to replace your battery, when you need to bring the watch up to good quality, for instance, if there's some desk dings on it, if it gets a bit of use, maybe you ask the watch fixer to do a polishing of the watch. Be very careful with it. Obviously, you could possibly learn these things yourself, but that's more investment upfront on your behalf. If you do decide that you want to repair these watches yourself, you could really go wild with this thing. So for instance, you might want to start changing your straps yourself, and you might want to buy something like these little watch repair kits, something like this, where you want to change the actual bracelet. This is a nice little holder for the bracelet, and you might want to have like something like this. This is an alternative. You have these pins here that you can use to basically change the bracelet. You have another pin pusher here that's a little bit longer with different edges, different types for taking off where the lugs are. You've also got this little soft hammer. Of course, it's also important to use the right kind of buffing cloths. And as you get really advanced, you start to get into this kind of material here, right, where you really are going to the next level. This can be pretty good if you're, looking at things up close, you want light, etc., want to, magnify. And these are not very expensive either. You might want to get some boxing tape at some point. Some of this bubble foam here, if you're actually packaging or sending things. A little weighing scale here that you can get the actual weight, number of pounds if you're actually selling. A bunch of other parts. Gloves are also quite helpful just so you're keeping everything clean. What I did, I basically changed the strap on this one. So I have this original bracelet here on the Tissot, which I just enjoy bracelets. I've had this for almost 2 decades. Whereas I changed the strap, which was alligator, and there's also a leather strap. There's also sometimes this calf string strap. So I basically changed these straps. I prefer wearing bracelets. So I thought in this particular case, I thought that the black crystal and the black bracelet would be a nice combination. Now, of course, you could have gone for a white rubber strap as opposed to metal black bracelet. You could have gone for a white rubber strap with, to match the white dial here, or even red in rubber strap. If you went for the red, of course, rubber strap, you'd start to be copying Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful from Shark Tank, who likes to personalize his watches with the red kind of leather straps in most of his watches. So, he just keeps the actual case and then just changes the strap. You can do that on your own if you have something like those watch repair kits. That's very useful. Now, in terms of shipping the watch and insuring it, look, if you go down to somewhere like FedEx, and you tell them that you're sending anything more than about $1,000 or thereabouts. And if it's not jewelry, right, if you tell them it's a watch, it's going to be very expensive or they won't deliver. They'll say that we can't insure this. What I would highly recommend is checking out a company like IFSI for sure. Again, I'm not getting sponsored by any companies, but IFSI for sure is really excellent. They've got this deal where because they're able to go to FedEx with large quantity, they can insure your package and FedEx just delivers the package and you can send it then on or buy it at a fraction of the usual cost, with a lot more confidence. It'll be insured like right the way up, like no matter how expensive the watch is. So the shipping is very important. Record, your shipping. You want to take pictures of that when you're sending it if you're actually selling a watch. Some of you may be wondering, in a lot of my videos behind me, I have my watch or watches sometimes moving around in this little box, which is just this Wolf watch winder box. When you have a watch that has an automatic battery or no battery, you need to wind it every 2 days, especially if you're not wearing it too much, because a lot of the times these watches, just from movement, they actually wind the battery to that extent. So what these watch winders do is that they move around a certain number of rotations. Again, you can change the rotations on these depending on your specific watch and the number of rotations per day. It's good to have them going in 2 directions, not only just in one direction. So bi-directional is very useful. And you can get the exact number of rotations per day, again, depending on your watch. So Wolf watch winders are excellent. I will leave a link in the description. Again, I'm not being sponsored by any of the companies I'm mentioning. One thing you can actually do with these modular Wolf winders is you can stack a bunch of them together. You can put them horizontally. You can also put them vertically. You have these little packs like this. So if I wanted to stack them vertically, I had another one, I could just put that one on there, and you can stack a certain number of them together, and then you connect them the same power source. They all come along like that, and it can be quite neat to see all your watches. So I had a larger collection at the start of this year, but I've since liquidated much of my watch portfolio just this particular year, as I'm focusing on higher end watches, so I don't want to have as many lower end. I'd rather have a few very nice watches than many of the more entry-level watches. So guys, are watches investments? Well, it depends on the type of timepiece. In this video, we looked at some of the types of timepieces that are typically decent investments. We also examined some places where you might want to buy or sell away from the conventional dealer, and some tips on how to maintain and thoroughly enjoy your timepiece. So guys, if you found the investment of your time worthwhile, pardon the pun, please consider sharing this video. It would mean so much to me, and it does help the YouTube algorithm in terms of providing other people with this free content, which of course is the goal of this channel. Until the next time, I just couldn't resist.